Okay, so have you ever felt like just overwhelmed by like all the health and wellness information out there? Especially when it comes to supplements.
Oh, yeah, totally. Like 1 minute, something's a miracle cure, and then the next, it's totally debunked.
Right. Like, how are you supposed to know what to actually believe and what's actually worth your time to understand?
Yeah, and sometimes you just want, like, the shortcut,
Yeah,
you know? Like, you want someone to just tell you the bottom line without having to read through all the studies yourself.
exactly. And that's basically what we do in these deep dives, right? Like, we take something that seems really complex and try to make it clear and understandable.
Yeah, we do all the hard work of going through the research, so you don't have to.
Yeah. And today we're diving into something that I think a lot of people have heard about, especially if they're into fitness,
Yeah.
but there's a lot more to it than people realize, I think, especially when it comes to women, and that is creatine.
Creatine, yeah. It's definitely one of those supplements that gets talked about a lot, but I think there are a lot of misconceptions out there about it, especially for women.
Yeah, for sure. So today our mission is really to focus on creatine and its effects specifically on females across their lifespan.
Like how it can impact their health and their fitness and performance at different stages of life.
Yeah, and we've got some really interesting research here, both on like general supplement use and then also diving into the specific science behind how creatine actually works in the body.
So we'll be able to kind of connect the dots between the research and what it actually means for women in their everyday lives.
Exactly. So whether you're someone who's hitting the gym regularly or you're juggling a million things like work and family or you're just curious about how to optimize your well-being, I think there's going to be something in here for you.
Yeah, definitely. I think we're going to uncover some pretty surprising insights about creatine for women.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. I guess what exactly is creatine and what is it doing in our bodies?
Okay, so creatine, it's actually a natural compound that's already found in your body.
Oh, so it's not something like totally foreign that you're putting into your body?
Exactly. And it plays a really important role in energy production. Like it's a key player in the production of ATP, which is like the energy currency of your cells.
ATP. Okay, I've heard of that, but I don't really understand what it is.
So basically, ATP, it's like the fuel that your cells use to do pretty much everything.
Oh, okay, so without ATP, our cells can't function.
Exactly. And creatine is specifically involved in this process called the creatine kinase reaction. It's kind of like a rapid recharge system for ATP. So it helps to keep your energy levels up during those really short bursts of high intensity activity.
Oh, I see. So that's why people take it for things like weightlifting and sprinting.
Exactly. It helps you to like power through those really intense efforts. And what's also really interesting is that this recharge process, it also acts as a metabolic buffer. So it helps to manage the acidity in your muscles when you're working out really hard.
Oh, so that's why people say it helps with that burning sensation you get when you're pushing yourself.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a sponge that soaks up that acid buildup. And that's not all it does. Creatine is also found in your central nervous system.
Oh, really? So
Okay.
it's not just about muscles.
Nope. There's actually some evidence that it supports brain function too.
Wow, that's interesting. So, like, how does that work?
Well, we don't know all the details yet, but it seems like creatine might help your brain cells to function more efficiently,
Mm.
especially when you're putting them under stress, like during a tough workout or when you're dealing with a lot of mental challenges.
So it's like giving your brain a little extra fuel to keep up.
Exactly.
That's so cool. Okay, so with all these important functions, you'd think we'd have a really clear picture of how creatine works for everyone. But our sources indicate that its effects in females are kind of less understood than in males. Why is that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's actually a really important one because even though creatine has been studied for decades, the research specifically on women is definitely lagging behind.
Oh, wow. So there's like a big knowledge gap when it comes to women and creatine.
Yeah, for sure. And part of the reason for this is that there are some pretty significant biological differences between males and females that can affect how creatine works in the body.
Okay, so let's talk about those differences. What are some of the key things that we need to understand?
Well, first off, women generally have about 70 to 80% lower natural creatine stores in their bodies compared to men.
Oh, wow. That's a big difference.
Yeah, it is. And they also tend to consume less creatine in their diet.
Oh, so like through the foods they eat?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So right away, you can see why supplementing with creatine might have a bigger impact for women in terms of raising their overall creatine levels.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like if you're starting from a lower point, then the potential for increase is greater.
Exactly. But here's where it gets a little bit tricky. Research has shown that even though women have lower total creatine stores, they actually have about 10% higher resting concentrations of creatine within their muscles compared to men.
Wait, so they have less creatine overall, but more in their muscles at rest. That seems kind of counterintuitive.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It's a bit of a head scratcher, and it raises some interesting questions. Like, does this mean that women are less responsive to creatine supplementation? Or maybe they need different dosages to see the same effects as men?
Yeah, like, did the standard recommendations even apply to women?
That's a great question, and we don't have all the answers yet, but it's definitely something to keep in mind.
Okay, so we've got these differences in creatine storage, and then there's also the whole hormonal piece, right? Our sources talk about how hormone-driven changes throughout a woman's life can really influence her creatine homeostasis. Can you explain what that means and why it's important?
Yeah, so creatine homeostasis, it's basically your body's way of maintaining a balance of creatine, like how much is being produced, how it's being transported, used, and stored.
Okay, so it's like the overall regulation of creatine in your body.
Exactly. And this whole system can be affected by the hormonal fluctuations that women experience during their menstrual cycle, during pregnancy, postpartum, and through menopause.
So it's not like a static thing, it's constantly changing.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to understand, because it means that creatine supplementation might be particularly relevant or have different effects at different points in a woman's life.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's not a one-size-fits-all situation.
Nope, not at all. And our sources actually highlight a direct connection between sex hormones like estrogen and progesterone and how our bodies handle creatine.
Okay, so tell me more about that. How do those hormones come into play?
Well, there's evidence that estrogen can influence the activity of that enzyme we talked about before, creatine kinase, the one that helps to regenerate ATP.
Oh, right, the one that's like the rapid recharge system for energy.
Exactly. And progesterone might also have an effect. There's even a theoretical model that illustrates this complex interplay between creatine kinase and the hormones of the menstrual cycle.
Well, so it's like this whole intricate dance between hormones and enzymes and energy production.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, so we know that a lot of women experience fluctuations in their energy and physical capacity throughout their menstrual cycle. How does creatine fit into that monthly rhythm?
Well, interestingly, research has shown that serum creatine kinase levels are actually higher during menstruation compared to other phases of the cycle.
Oh, really? So your ability to regenerate energy is actually higher during your period.
It seems that way, yeah. And on the flip side, these levels tend to decrease as we age, and they also decrease during pregnancy, with the lowest levels being observed in early pregnancy.
Huh, interesting. So, like, why would they be lower during pregnancy?
That's a good question, and we don't have all the answers yet, but some research suggests that it might have to do with the increased demands of pregnancy on the mother's body. Like, the growing baby needs a lot of nutrients and energy, so the mother's creatine stores might get depleted.
Oh, that makes sense. So could supplementing with creatine during pregnancy be beneficial?
That's a really interesting question, and we'll definitely get to that later when we talk about creatine and pregnancy specifically. But for now, let's stick with the menstrual cycle.
Okay, sounds good.
So where were we? Oh, yeah, so some animal studies have also suggested that creatine kinase activity might fluctuate in response to estrogen levels. And one theory is that during the luteal phase of the menstrual cycle, when estrogen levels were at their peak, women might experience less muscle damage after intense exercise.
Oh, really? So higher estrogen might actually offer some muscle protection.
Potentially.
Oh.
Yeah, it's like the higher estrogen helps to spare your muscles from too much breakdown.
Wow, that's fascinating. Okay, so what about when estrogen is low, like during the follicular phase of the cycle or in situations like amenorrhea, pregnancy, or menopause?
Yeah, those are all really important considerations, and they kind of highlight why creatine supplementation might be particularly relevant during those times.
Okay, so let's break those down one by one, starting with premenopausal women who are still having regular cycles. We've talked about the hormonal context. What does the actual evidence say about creatine as a performance enhancer in this group? Does it actually help women to get stronger and more powerful without causing them to gain a bunch of weight?
Yeah, those are like the two big questions, right? And the good news is that there's a lot of research on this now. And the evidence is pretty clear that creatine is an effective way for premenopausal women to increase their strength power and overall athletic performance.
That's great to hear. And what about the weight gain question? Because I know that's a big concern for a lot of women.
Yeah, for sure. And it's understandable because there's this misconception that taking creatine will make you bulk up, but that's really not the case for women.
So where does that idea even come from?
Well, I think it partly stems from the fact that some men do experience rapid weight gain when they first start taking creatine.
Oh, okay, so it's like a guy thing.
Kind of, yeah. It's more common in men, And it's usually due to water retention. Like the creatine pulls water into the muscle cells, which can make you temporarily weigh a bit more.
Oh, so it's not actually fat gain, it's just water weight.
Exactly. And that water weight is actually a good thing. It helps with hydration, and it can actually make your muscles look fuller and more defined.
Oh, okay, so maybe that's why some guys like it.
Maybe, yeah. But for women, the weight gain is usually minimal if it happens at all.
That's reassuring because I know a lot of women are worried about that.
Yeah, definitely. And the other thing to keep in mind is that if you're taking creatine with huge amounts of carbs, that can also contribute to weight gain because your body is storing those extra carbs as glycogen.
Oh, right. Glycogen is like stored energy in your muscles.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But as we'll talk about later when we get into dosing strategies, taking tons of carbs with creatine isn't always the best approach for women anyway.
Okay, good to know. So overall, it sounds like the benefits of creatine for premenopausal women far outweigh the risks.
Yeah, I'd say so, for sure.
Okay, and what about safety? Is creatine safe for women in this age group to use?
Yeah, there have been tons of studies looking at the safety of creatine, and the overwhelming consensus is that it's safe for healthy individuals to use at recommended doses.
Okay, that's good to hear. So what are those recommended doses? We'll get into that more later, right?
Yeah, we'll definitely cover dosing strategies in detail later on, but for now, let's stick with the benefits.
Okay, sounds good. So how exactly does creatine work to improve performance in premenopausal women?
Well, remember how we talked about how creatine helps to regenerate ATP, that quick energy source your muscles need?
Yeah, I remember.
So basically, by increasing the levels of phosphocreatine or PCR in your muscles, creatine supplementation allows for a faster regeneration of ATP during those really intense bouts of exercise.
So it's like giving your muscles a bigger gas tank.
Exactly. And it also helps to buffer the accumulation of hydrogen ions, which are what contribute to that burning sensation you get when you're working out hard.
Oh, right. So it's like a two-pronged attack on fatigue.
Yeah, pretty much. And by allowing you to train at a higher intensity and maintain that intensity for longer, creatine can lead to significant improvements in strength, power, and muscle growth over time.
So it's not just about feeling less tired, it's actually helping you to get better results from your training.
Exactly. And we actually have some really cool studies that demonstrate this.
Okay, tell me about them. I love hearing about the actual research.
So one of the classic studies on this was done by Vandenberg and colleagues back in 1997. They looked at a group of women who had never done resistance training before, and they put them on a 10-week weightlifting program.
Oh, wow. So these women were totally new to lifting weights.
Yeah, they were. And they split them into two groups. One group got creatine supplements, and the other group got a placebo.
Okay, so it was like a controlled experiment.
Exactly. And what they found was that the women who took creatine had significantly greater increases in their muscle PCR levels compared to the placebo group.
So their muscles were better able to replenish their energy stores.
Exactly. And more importantly, they also saw a 20 to 25% greater increase in their 1-rep max strength for lower body exercises like the leg press, leg extension, and squat compared to the placebo group.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. And they also gained more lean muscle mass overall without any significant changes in their body weight or body fat percentage.
So they were getting stronger and building muscle without putting on fat.
Exactly. And here's another cool finding. They even maintained those strength gains during a detraining period where they stopped lifting weights without continuing to take the creatine supplements.
Wow, so the effects lasted even after they stopped taking it.
Yeah, for a certain period of time at least. That suggests that creatine can actually help you to hold on to those gains even when you're not training as hard.
That's really interesting. Okay, so we've got this evidence from untrained women. What about women who are already athletes or who are regularly training? Does creatine still make a difference for them?
Yeah, great question. And the answer is yes. We've got research in trained women as well, and it shows similar benefits. Like, for example, there was a study on female collegiate soccer players who went through a creatine loading phase followed by a maintenance dose while they were doing resistance training for 13 weeks. And they found that the women who took creatine had significantly greater increases in their 1RM for both the bench press and the squat compared to the placebo group.
So like 18% for the bench press and 24% for the squat, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, you got it. And another study on NCAA division. Female lacrosse players also found that creatine loading led to greater improvements in bench press strength. And it's not just about strength either. There was a study on college-aged women that showed that creatine supplementation significantly improved their muscular power. Like, it decreased the time it took them to reach peak force during a leg extension, and it increased their average power output during both leg extension and flexion exercises.
So it's helping with both strength and power output.
Exactly. And again, these improvements all occurred without any noticeable changes in their body weight or muscle size.
Okay, so we're seeing this consistent pattern of benefits in strength and power across different types of exercise and training levels. But I also noticed that there were a couple of studies that didn't find statistically significant results. What might explain that?
Yeah, that's a really important point to bring up. Not every single study shows a dramatic effect, and there are a few potential reasons for that.
Okay, like what are some of those reasons?
Well, one possibility is that there might be individual variability in how people respond to creatine. Like, some people might be non-responders, meaning they just don't see any noticeable benefits from taking it.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's not a guaranteed thing for everyone.
Exactly. And another factor could be the dosage or the training protocol used in the study.
Yeah.
Like, maybe the dose wasn't high enough or the training wasn't intense enough to elicit a measurable difference.
Oh, I see. So the study design itself could influence the results.
Exactly. And it's also possible that some of the participants might have already had relatively high baseline levels of creatine in their muscles, which could make them less sensitive to the effects of supplementation.
That makes sense. So if you're already starting with high levels, then taking more might not make as big of a difference.
Exactly. And I think it's important to acknowledge that there are still some gaps in the research, especially when it comes to women. But overall, the evidence pretty strongly suggests that creatine supplementation is an effective tool for increasing strength and power in both women who are new to training and those who are already active, and typically without causing large fluctuations in body weight.
Okay, so the bottom line is that if you're a woman who's looking to get stronger or more powerful, creatine is definitely something worth considering.
Totally agree with that.
All right, so we've covered the strength and power aspects pretty thoroughly. What about other areas of exercise performance like endurance or the ability to perform repeated high-intensity efforts? How does creatine affect those?
So creatine's performance-enhancing effects, they actually extend beyond just strength and power to include both anaerobic and aerobic exercise performance.
Oh, wow. So it can actually help with endurance too.
Yeah, there's some evidence to suggest that it can.
Yeah.
And for anaerobic exercise, the main way it works is by helping to delay fatigue.
Right, because it's helping to replenish those PCR stores and buffer that acidity buildup in the muscles.
Exactly. And there have been several studies that have shown positive results in women.
Oh, cool. Like what kind of results?
Well, for example, short periods of creatine loading have been shown to significantly improve anaerobic working capacity in physically active women.
An anaerobic working capacity, that's basically a measure of how much high-intensity work you can do using that immediate ATP PCR energy system, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like how much you can push yourself before you start to feel that burn.
Got it. And how much improvement did they see with creatine?
Well, some studies have shown increases in the range of 10 to 15%, which is pretty significant.
Yeah, that's not bad at all. And what about other types of anaerobic exercise?
There have also been studies looking at things like sprint cycling performance and plyometric training.
Plyometrics, those are like jump training exercises, right?
Yep, things like box jumps and squat jumps. And they found that creatine supplementation can enhance the benefits of plyometric training in terms of both jump height and repeated sprint performance.
Oh, wow, that's interesting. So it's not just helping you to jump higher, it's also helping you to recover faster between jumps so you can maintain that performance over multiple reps.
Exactly. And there's even some evidence that creatine can help with recovery between bouts of exercise more generally. Like, there was a study that looked at what happens when you combine aerobic exercise with subsequent resistance training.
So like doing cardio and then lifting weights.
Yeah, and they found that creatine supplementation actually seemed to help women maintain their performance during the later sets of resistance exercises, suggesting that it was aiding in their recovery.
That's really cool. So it's like, it's not just about that initial burst of energy. It's also about helping you to bounce back quicker so you can keep pushing yourself.
Exactly.
This is all really fascinating. Okay, so we've talked about anaerobic exercise. What about endurance exercise? Does creatine help with that too, or does it actually make it worse because of the potential for water weight gain?
That's a great question, and it's a common concern, but actually there is some evidence that creatine might offer benefits for endurance performance as well.
Oh, really? So it's not necessarily going to make you heavier and slower?
Not necessarily, no. There was a study by Nelson and colleagues where they found that after creatine loading, women actually experienced lower oxygen consumption and a lower heart rate at submaximal exercise intensities.
Oh, wow. So they were using less energy to do the same amount of work.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And they also had a longer time to exhaustion during a graded exercise test, meaning they could push themselves harder for longer before they had to stop.
that's pretty impressive. So how do they think that's working?
Well, the researchers proposed that the increased PCR stores might somehow be making energy production more efficient, which would explain why they were using less oxygen.
That makes sense. Okay, but I'm guessing it's not all good news, right?
Well, yeah, not all studies have found the same positive effects on endurance performance. Some studies haven't shown any impact on things like VO2 max, critical velocity, or time to exhaustion.
Oh, okay. So it's a mixed bag.
Yeah, kinda. But there is some research that indicates that creatine loading can delay the onset of neuromuscular fatigue during gradually increasing cycling intensity in women.
Neuromuscular fatigue. That's like when your muscles start to feel tired and weak, right?
Exactly. And the idea here is that by maintaining those PCR levels, creatine helps to delay the point at which your body has to rely on anaerobic energy pathways, which produce lactic acid and ammonia.
Oh, so it's like it's pushing back that point where you start to feel the burn.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that can allow you to sustain a higher level of effort for longer.
Okay, that makes sense. And what
Mhm.
about high intensity interval training or HII? Have they studied creatine in that context?
Yeah, they have, and the results are a little bit mixed. Some earlier studies in men showed that creatine could enhance the benefits of HIT in terms of things like cardiorespiratory fitness and body composition, but more recent studies in women haven't necessarily found the same thing.
Oh, that's interesting. So there might be some sex differences in how creatine interacts with HIT.
Yeah, that's definitely possible.
Mm.
And it also highlights how important it is to look at the specifics of the study, like the dosage, the training protocol, and the population being studied.
Right, because you can't just assume that what works for men will automatically work the same way for women.
Exactly.
Okay, so even though the research on creatine and endurance exercise is a bit mixed, it sounds like it could still be beneficial for athletes who have multiple events or who are competing on consecutive days.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point. Like if you need to recover quickly between efforts or maintain your performance over multiple days, then creatine could definitely be helpful.
Okay, so moving on from the world of sports and exercise, let's talk about a really significant life stage pregnancy. What are the important considerations when it comes to creatine during this time?
Pregnancy, it's obviously a huge physiological change for women, and it places a lot of extra demands on the body. Like the mother's body has to work overtime to support the growth and development of the baby.
Yeah, it's like a whole other human being is growing inside of you.
Exactly. And that requires a lot of energy and nutrients. And research has shown that this increased demand during pregnancy is actually associated with a reduction in the mother's own creatine stores.
Oh, wow. So like her body is being depleted of creatine.
Yeah, in a way. And there's even some evidence that lower maternal creatine levels are linked to things like lower birth weight and an increased risk of preterm
Oh,
birth.
that sounds serious.
Yeah.
So could supplementing with creatine potentially be beneficial during pregnancy?
That's a really interesting question, and it's one that researchers are starting to explore more and more.
Okay, so what's the current thinking on that?
Well, so far, most of the research on creatine and pregnancy has been done in animals, but the findings are pretty promising.
Oh, okay. Tell me more about that.
So they've found that when mothers receive creatine supplementation during pregnancy, it can enhance the uptake of creatine by the neurons in their offspring.
Neurons, those are like the brain cells, right?
Yep. And it also seems to support the health of their mitochondria, which are like the little powerhouses inside of cells that produce energy.
Oh, wow. So it's like it's giving the baby's brain a boost.
It seems that way.
Yeah.
And there's even some evidence that it might have a protective effect against brain injury in newborns who experience a lack of oxygen during birth.
Wow, that's amazing. So like if a baby has a difficult birth, creatine might help to protect their brain.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
And while we don't have any large-scale human studies yet specifically on creatine supplementation during pregnancy, some experts believe that it could be a safe and low-cost nutritional strategy to potentially reduce complications both during and after pregnancy.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense given what we know about the importance of creatine for energy production and cell function.
Exactly, and it's definitely a really important area where we need more human research.
Okay, so lots of potential benefits there, but we
Right.
need more research to confirm it in humans.
Got it. Yep, and now let's talk about the other end of the reproductive spectrum, postmenopausal women.
All right, so we're going from pregnancy to menopause. What are the key things to consider for creatine in this group?
As you know, menopause is a time of major hormonal shifts for women, And the decline in estrogen levels that happens during menopause is a big factor in the age-related loss of muscle mass, bone density, and strength.
Oh, right. I've heard of that. It's called sarcopenia or dynapenia or something like that.
Yeah, those are both terms that are used to describe this condition.
Mm-hmm.
And while the exact mechanisms aren't fully understood, yet it seems like lower estrogen levels are linked to increased inflammation and oxidative stress in the body.
Okay, so it's like menopause is creating a more inflammatory environment.
Yeah, kind of. And that can have negative effects on muscle and bone health. And lower estrogen levels might also impair the body's ability to build new muscle and repair existing muscle tissue in response to exercise.
Oh, so it makes it harder to recover from workouts and build strength.
Exactly. And that's where creatine might be able to help.
Okay, so how so?
Well, creatine has been shown to have anti-inflammatory effects, and it can also help to reduce oxidative stress.
So it's like it's fighting back against those negative effects of menopause.
Yeah, in a way. And it's also been shown to potentially reduce markers of bone breakdown and promote bone formation.
Oh, that's interesting. So it could be helpful for osteoporosis too.
Potentially, yeah, although more research is needed on that.
Okay, so it sounds like creatine could be beneficial for both muscle and bone health in postmenopausal women.
Yeah, definitely. And it can also influence the activity of satellite cells, which are important for muscle growth and repair.
Oh, right. Those are like the stem cells of your muscles.
Exactly. And it can also affect the production of growth factors and other signaling pathways that are involved in muscle development.
Okay, so it's like it's giving your muscles everything they need to stay healthy and strong.
Pretty much.
That's great. And so what's the best way for postmenopausal women to use creatine? Like, should they take it on its own or should they combine it with exercise?
That's a great question. And the research suggests that the best approach is to combine creatine supplementation with resistance training.
Okay, so lifting weights, basically.
Exactly. And when you do that, you see some pretty impressive results.
Right.
Like, for example, there was a study by Gualano and colleagues that looked at older postmenopausal women who were over 60 years old. And they found that the women who took creatine while they were doing resistance training had significantly greater gains in lean muscle mass and upper body strength compared to those who just did the training without creatine.
Wow, so creatine was like a turbo boost for their results.
Yeah, pretty much. And other studies have shown that creatine can help to slow down the rate of bone mineral density loss in the hip and improve indicators of bone strength when combined with resistance training.
So it's helping with both muscle and bone health, which is really important as we age.
Exactly. And we've also seen studies reporting improvements in overall strength, enhanced performance in functional tasks like walking and stair climbing, and even benefits for women with knee osteoarthritis when they use creatine in conjunction with lower body resistance training.
So it's like it's helping with everyday activities as well as athletic performance.
Exactly. And it's all about improving quality of life.
That's really cool. Okay, but what about taking creatine on its own without doing any exercise? Does that have any benefits for postmenopausal women?
Well, the research on that is a little bit more mixed. Some studies have shown that short-term high-dose creatine loading can lead to some modest increases in lean body mass, muscle strength, and physical function in postmenopausal women. But other studies haven't found any significant effects.
Oh, okay, so it's not as clear cut.
Yeah, and long-term supplementation at low doses doesn't seem to have any noticeable benefits on its own either.
So it sounds like exercise is really the key here.
Yeah, pretty much. Like creatine can definitely help, but it works best when it's combined with a regular resistance training program.
Okay, that makes sense. So what's the take-home message for postmenopausal women?
I'd say if you're a postmenopausal woman and you're looking to maintain your muscle mass, your bone health, and your overall physical function, then combining creatine supplementation with resistance training is a really good strategy.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here when it comes to creatine and its effects on women's physical health and performance. But let's shift gears a bit and talk about something that's really important for overall well-being, mood, and mental health. How might creatine play a role in that realm?
This is a really interesting area of research that's gaining more and more attention. And as you probably know, rates of depression are significantly higher in women compared to men.
Yeah, that's true. And it's often attributed to the hormonal fluctuations that women experience throughout their lives.
Exactly. Those hormonal changes can definitely play a role. But it also seems like women's brains might be more sensitive to those hormonal shifts, which could contribute to the increased risk of depression.
Okay, so it's not just about the hormones themselves. It's also about how the brain responds to them.
Exactly. And this is where creatine might come in.
How so?
Well, some early research found a positive correlation between the levels of creatine in the cerebrospinal fluid, which surrounds the brain and spinal cord, and the levels of metabolites of dopamine and serotonin.
Dopamine and serotonin, those are like the feel-good neurotransmitters,
Yeah,
right?
they play a huge role in regulating mood motivation and a whole bunch of other important functions.
Okay, so what does this correlation tell us?
Well, it suggests that having a healthy and well-functioning creatine system in the brain is important for proper neurotransmission related to our emotional state.
Oh, that makes sense. So if your creatine levels are low, then your brain might not be producing enough of those feel-good chemicals.
Exactly. And interestingly, studies have also found an inverse relationship between the severity of depression and the levels of creatine in the white matter of the brain.
So people with more severe depression tend to have lower creatine levels in their brains.
Exactly, which further strengthens the link between brain creatine metabolism and the experience of depression.
Okay, so that's pretty convincing. And what's even more compelling is that the improvements seen with effective antidepressant treatments often align with this pattern,
Right.
right?
Yeah, exactly. Like when people respond well to antidepressants, their brain creatine levels often go up.
Oh, wow. So it's like creatine is playing a role in the effectiveness of the medication.
It seems that way, yeah.
Yeah.
And this has led some researchers to suggest that creatine supplementation might actually have a pro-energetic effect on brain chemistry.
So by boosting energy production in the brain, creatine might help to improve mood.
Exactly. And there's some evidence to support that.
Okay, like what kind of evidence?
Well, we know that brain activity requires a lot of energy, and during intense mental effort, the levels of PCR in the brain can drop rapidly.
Oh, right, PCR. That's the molecule that helps to regenerate ATP.
Exactly. And when your PCR levels are low, your brain might not be able to produce ATP as efficiently, which can lead to mental fatigue and other cognitive problems.
So it's like your brain is running out of fuel.
Exactly. And creatine supplementation can help to replenish those PCR stores, which can support the brain's energy production.
Okay, that makes sense. And are there any studies that have looked at creatine and depression specifically in women?
Yeah, there have been a few, and the results are pretty promising. They've found that when creatine is combined with antidepressant medication, it can significantly reduce symptoms of depression in both adolescent and adult females who have been diagnosed with major depressive disorder.
Oh, wow. So it's like it's making the medication work even better.
Yeah, it seems that way. And one study even found that creatine supplementation led to faster improvements in depression scores, some even within just 2 weeks.
2 weeks? That's really fast, especially considering that antidepressants usually take several weeks to start working.
I know, right?
Ah,
It's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
And it suggests that creatine might help to accelerate the typical antidepressant response time.
that's really exciting.